Hey y'all, welcome back to the lab. In this video, we are going to be talking about how I added an AlpineJS click counter to my HTMX-powered website. So earlier this year, I built a 1 million checkboxes clone using HTMX. It's been running in prod for a few months, getting thousands of clicks, but I felt it was a bit boring, and so I wanted to add a bit more gamification to it, first with some click counters. So I have it pulled up here. I'm going to be using this for demos, but basically the idea is it's a million checkboxes. There's a bunch on here. It's powered with HTMX. Does polling only on the thing that you're looking at. I've got whole posts describing how this works, but this is kind of what we're talking about. And the new feature here is when I click stuff, now we are getting some clicks in here. So let's talk about how we built that. All right, so adding a client-side click counter with AlpineJS. Now, HTMX can certainly do click counters, and I think if your counter requires a database fetch, then that may make sense because you're already going to need to be sending the data to the server and then fetching it back so you get the up-to-date counter. And HTMX can do that and do that well. For now, though, I'm keeping things pretty simple with just a client-side counter because I don't really know how I want to store this data, if I want to store this data at all, or anything like that. And so if it's client-side only, then relying on HTMX to do that is kind of not the right tool for this. In general, HTMX is better for things that are like server-side interactivity, and Alpine's better for client-side interactivity. And so if this thing is only going to live client-side, HTMX doesn't really seem like the best tool for this job. And I previously built a few projects combining HTMX and Alpine, again for server and client interactivity respectively, and had a pretty good experience. And so I just decided to reach for Alpine here because I knew it would work and it was a good fit for this. So the steps I needed to do to create this click counter was actually pretty small. It's pretty simple to use Alpine, which is one of the reasons I like it so much. And basically what we had to do is just add the library to the page so we can actually use it, create data on my element that has a count attribute, on click of a checkbox, increment the count, and then create a text element that references the updating count. I'll also say that I was using Claude for this as a reference, and it is like really good at things with HTMX and with Alpine. And so if you're ever stuck or need examples or something, I think the AIs are pretty good at this right now. And so you can always ask those for a reference. And so I'll just walk through kind of how this works, and then I'll demo it to you live with 1 million checkboxes. All right, so first to add the AlpineJS, I just include the library from CDN. A lot of places tell you that, you should vendor this into your own app so that you're serving it yourself, so that, you're not beholden to third parties like deciding to not host this anymore or whatever, which I think is good advice if you're like running something in prod. But considering this is a dumb little website, I just really don't care that much. And so it's just easier to use it from the CDN. And I've really never had any problems with this. So this is what it is. It goes in your head tag. You can see it right here on my page. Make this bigger. And so that's how we're getting Alpine on the page. To create the data, I add the x-data equals count 0 to my surrounding div, and basically what we're saying is like we want data, it's going to be scoped to wherever I add this stuff, and I just need it to have an attribute of count equal to 0. And if we look at the surrounding div here, we can see that in action. So here I have x-data count 0, and crucially, like this needs to be in the surrounding div because that's how Alpine plays nicely, so that everything that's referencing the count or updating the count will be inside of it, and so that's why it's basically in my checkboxes container. Now to make the checkbox clicks update the count, I added the @click equals to count plus plus, which basically says on click do something, like run some JavaScript, and here I just want to update the property, so that's how we do it. And this means that on every click, it's going to run this, which increases count in the surrounding data scope. And so this refreshes, and so we kind of lose our spot, but let me see if I can show you this. @click equals count plus plus. So I'm going to show it to you again. @click equals count plus plus. So there it is. Now, you'll note that like the reason we're losing our space here is because this grid is literally fetching a new grid from the server every single, few seconds. And so this is always a new checkbox. What you're seeing here is like a fully refreshed version of the checkbox grid, and that's how we're getting these, global data syncs, which is fine. It works. Clearly it works here fine. But you can imagine that this is sending a large payload, or at least relatively large versus just sending like data via JSON API. And I was pretty worried about this. I was like, I'm adding just a small piece of text, @click equals count plus plus, but I'm doing this 1,000 times in each of these grids, and then 1,000,000 if I was refreshing the whole thing, which I'm not. But like, how much does this add? And what I noticed from the network tab is like, it's really only adding about 0.1 kilobytes. So it goes from like 4.2 to 4.3 every few seconds, which isn't really that bad, so it doesn't really matter that much, but something to consider if you're going this route. is that Alpine, because it's declared as part of the markup, it will increase the markup size if you're doing this like an extremely large amount of time. Though usually it doesn't matter because this kind of thing can be minimized pretty well. It compresses very well because it's the exact same thing a lot of times, which is good for compression. But something to consider. And then finally, to actually show the number of clicks that you've made, I created a little text element with a span bound to the count variable. Alpine is reactive, so whenever the variable changes in the scope, it looks for all the references inside of its scope and then updates those. And so here I'm using xtext and then referencing the piece of data that I want. And here it was 0 when I copied this, but it would fill in the count. So I can show you this here. Here we can see that it's at 11, and then if I click a few boxes here, it updates there because it's reactive. So yep, that's how I added a little click counter. Now some future work, I like having a counter here. I think it makes the page feel a bit more alive, but of course it's still pretty basic. It's not like a full game. Like I show this to people and they're like, this isn't fun, this isn't a game. And so I think there's a few ways that I could increase dynamism, but still like keep the spirit of the project, which is just like a dumb little HTMX prototype. A few things I'm thinking of are like persisting the count to local storage so that you can save progress and always like come back and you're not starting at 0. Another thing is to consider global counters. So like how many clicks have we gotten total? This is something I wish I had implemented at the start of the project because it would be cool to just see, I'm saying I have thousands of clicks, but like how many thousands would be cool to see. And also gives everyone a kind of sense that like they're building towards something, or like, their click matters, which I think is a funny little gaming mechanic. Yeah, I haven't built these yet. Might get to them over the winter break while I'm not really doing anything. So let me know if you have ideas for making 1 million checkboxes more fun to click, because this is probably a project I'll keep around for a while. Next, so if you haven't already, please check out 1 million checkboxes. Go check some boxes. That's why I built this little website, is for people to use it. So please do. And if you like this post, you might also like how I built 1 million checkboxes, globally synced data using HTMX. You might also be interested in HTMX for Alpine, which should you choose for your web app, a deeper dive into kind of when I'm choosing to pick one versus the other, or oftentimes combine the two. And then finally, Cloud Seed Quick Start, how to get a full stack F# app in 10 minutes. This is basically my like boilerplate for web apps using F# that I used to start a lot of my web apps these days. This is what I built 1 million checkboxes with. This is actually what I built my blog here with. And so I've gotten a lot of value out of it. And so hoping to get more people in the F# web dev community using it, or at least sharing more of their tips for how they're building as well. So that's it for this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.